Today on the Brands on Brands podcast, we're diving into the one thing that separates a successful brand from a failure. What's that one thing? It's brand association.
We know now because of science that if you have an emotional reaction to a stimuli, to something you learn, your memory is going to work harder at storing that information in the brain. So why doesn't every brand interaction have some kind of emotional resonance?
And we'll unlock the top strategies for developing your own brand meaning and differentiation. Meet Ulli Appelbaum, award-winning marketer and seasoned brand strategy consultant. Ulli is an award-winning and seasoned marketing and brand strategy consultant and the author of the new book, The Science of Brand Association: Win Minds, Win Markets.
Once you focus on brand association and start to understand them, you understand that marketing is not rocket science. It's about being rigorous, applying some core principle consistently.
That's enough for me. Let's jump into the show. All right, let's get going. I'm so excited to welcome our guest, Ulli Appelbaum, to the show. Ulli, first off, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. Very excited.
And welcome back, by the way. We've been here before, but we have some new exciting stuff to talk about. You've just released a book in April 2025 called The Science of Brand Associations: Win Minds, Win Markets. So we're talking a lot about today. I'm excited to get into it because this is really a brand strategy topic that not a lot of people get deep into, this specific topic. And I would love you to set the stage for us. Some simple definitions. Not everyone uses the same terminology. How do you define brand association? And why does it matter?
Sure. Great intro question, and excited to be on your show again. So the way I look at it is actually speak about brand association networks, right? So when you think about what is a brand is literally every element you remember about that brand, whether it's, it can be a logo or character, it can be an emotion you associate with the brand, it can be a piece of meaning or semantics that you associate with the brand, it can be an experience, or it can be an emotion. All these tidbits of information are connected in your brain as memories. And the point and the name of the game, obviously, is like when you are in the process of making a specific decision in a specific category, so where you are entering the moment of making a brand choice, the name of the game for a good marketer is really to have your brand come to mind first. Not only come to mind first, but also come to mind with the right associations that you decide to pick that brand. And that's literally what brand association networks are. Those are memories of emotions, experiences, meaning, content that you associate with a specific brand and or specific offering. And the name of the game, I believe, as a marketer, is to really build strong networks that are strongly associated with what you want them to be associated, that are associated with the right associations, and that come to mind when you make a purchase. That's literally what it is. It's an operating system. It tells you how brands are memorized in the brain. And knowing that, I believe, leads to better marketing because you know exactly what you need to do to build these strong networks of memories and experiences. So yeah, that's for me what a brand is. So not very romantic, but it's very functional, very pragmatic, applied to how the brain works.
I love that. And so when we're talking about associations, we're talking about these experiences and ideas and things that start to get connected to what our brand is in the minds of our consumer. These aren't like new ideas necessarily, but why is it so hard for a brand manager, for someone thinking about creating this for themselves? Why is it so difficult to figure out with a strategy, like what your brand association should be and how to develop them? Why is it so difficult?
Well, that's a great question. That's $1 million question, actually. And I'm not sure I know the answer for sure, but I was really surprised when I started to dive into the subject is that there is no book about the subject on Amazon. I have like millions of books and not one is focused on brand associations. And yet the concept has been used by thought leaders for the last 30 years, like Kevin Lane Keller or David Aker, sort of like the gurus of brand equity, started to use a brand association as a way to explain brand equity. Keller has a great brand framework to explain how to build equity that is full of brand association content. It's just mind-blowing. Mark Ritson or the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in Australia, they speak about mental availability. It's nothing more than, strong brand associations that come to mind. So I don't, the industry hasn't latched onto it. I think either because they're focused on other things they were promoting, like mental availability or brand equity 30 years ago. But I think part of it is also the industry likes solutions, right? So a short chapter in one of the chapters in the book, I diss a little bit, sort of like all these fancy theories that, gain a tremendous amount of buzz, but then that evaporate because people start to realize it sounds great, it's beautifully written, it makes it sound like it's going to be easy to fix my marketing problem. But then after spending a lot of money and resources, I realize it doesn't work for me, and those can be things like a brand purpose. And this can be things like, you probably remember Tipping Point, which was like the big thing when I was young. All these type of things of virtue branding, all these type of things are not universally true and universally applicable. But there's this need to focus on give me a quick fix solution that I can spend my millions of dollars against, and I'm going to run with it. And if everyone, agrees with that's the right thing to do, I lower my own risk to mess up, or if I mess up, I have an excuse that everyone else was thinking about that. I think the other thing that struck me and was that and I did a little exercise with all the major AI platforms, whether it's Perplexity, whether it's ChatGPTs. I looked at all the major best-selling books in marketing, and I asked ChatGPT and all the other platforms to put them in a matrix that focuses on which books are evidence-based and data-driven and which books are not. And what you realize is that 90% of popular marketing books out there are very well written, tap a little bit into science, to give a justification, but mainly live off anecdotal case studies, one point case studies. So what I wanted to do with this book is only focus either on science, the principles that are true and validated and accepted in science, whether it's neuroscience or cognitive science. And I only wanted to focus on principles that I could validate either through data or through triangulating, which means you make sure that every point I make in the book has evidence to support it.
You mentioned in the book that brand associations can be functional.
Mhm.
So, and then they also can carry meaning. I'd love to
Mhm.
start with the functional and just explain to people what a brand association that's functional, like what does that mean in layman's terms?
So the functionality refers not to what it's not like a functional benefit type thing, but it features on the mechanism of the association itself. It basically means it needs to be very strong. That means when you think, for example, about Geico, the insurance company, what comes to mind first? You can say 15% in 15 minutes. That is a strong link. If I say a snack bar that is crunchy and delicious, you don't associate that with anything in particular because there is no strong link between that sort of like meaning and a specific brand. So the strength of the association, how deep it is ingrained and associated with your brand is an important factor. But the second one we know is the link between the associations you have of a specific brand needs to be rich and strong as well. So coming back to Geico, it's you save time, you save money. The connection is really, really strong. And so this is sort of like the functionality of all of that.
Some of the other ideas in the book that were functional, when you think of McDonald's, obviously you think Golden Arches.
Sure.
For a brand that really that is dependent on foot traffic and cars pulling
Mhm.
off the freeway or something recognizable like that that you
Yes.
could see from a distance matters.
So you have this network of associations. If they are not anchored by what's called brand assets, like your arches or the logo, they are completely pointless because you cannot attribute them to a specific brand. So that is another important learning coming out of this book is the importance of distinctive brand assets. A lot of it has been written about that already. But what I've learned is a lot of young companies, they don't invest enough into them because they're not known enough or they don't have assets that are really distinctive. And a lot of big companies that have 100 years of history and familiarity do not leverage them in their communication enough. I don't know if it's the fear or like people don't want to see a logo, I don't want to see branded content and all these kind of things. But that's the second element, which is anchor them in, or connect them strongly with the brand association. So when you see the archers, your brain goes, ooh, Big Mac. Ooh, I remember the road trip we had last time. Ooh, I remember last time I was drunk and had a hangover and went to McDonald's. You have all these memories that come back. I'm hungry. I want, I have a craving for that. Um, Come back when you see the brand asset or the logo or the arches or the clown or whatever else is associated with the brand. So those are the mechanisms on how that works. Another one very simple is repetition. We know that repetition leads to familiarity and familiarity leads to liking. This is a mechanism that if you are consistent in your brand communication, you trigger that automatically. The brand becomes, oh yeah, it's, again, the McDonald's logo here or the Subway logo over there. You develop positive feelings towards the brand. These are all the mechanisms. And then above that comes what you alluded to is the meaning, which is then driven by other association, my background, my cultural background, my values, what's important to me, the environment I live in, which are all elements that contextualize what you know or what you associate with the brand, and that then become meaning. And the meaning then helps you also drive choice and preference for a specific brand.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too, because functional I understood right away. And then I like that you mentioned some of these do carry meaning. And the meanings, I didn't think of them automatically. You think of attributes like rebellion or freedom, these kind of emotional attributes that people identify themselves with, or
Mhm.
the brand, if you're a part of that brand, it almost helps you define yourself and your identity as a consumer. Why don't you talk about that a little bit more and how do brand associations carry meaning?
Mhm. Well, the content of the association leads to the meaning in a sense, right? So, for example, take Rolex, high-priced watch. Where do you see that in maybe, high glamour magazines, or you see Formula One car drivers, wear Rolex. So all these are things you associate with the Rolex that you think, oh, that's an exclusive status symbol, Or to be honest, Rolex is probably more in the stage now where you have these nouveau riche people who have made it, who walk around showing their Rolexes. This creates association that tells you, oh, Rolex is a status symbol that either I identify with or I do not identify with. And the time it gives is the same as the time a smartwatch gives you as well. So that doesn't, the meaning can also be cultural on where you grew up. So for me, a non-political example is, when you go to Chicago, there is a Nutella store on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And Nutella is a brand that every kid in Europe grew up with. So it's our 4 o'clock snack. You have a whole bunch of association, which a lot of Americans have not had because they didn't grow up in that environment and because the brand was much newer. Go into the Nutella store in Chicago, 90% of the visitors are foreigners, are non-Americans, because they see that, ooh, I remember my childhood, I remember my family meals, I remember all these good emotions, I want to experience the store itself. So this is sort of like a cultural meaning associated with the brand that some consumers will have and others will not. We can go into politics, but that would explode the frame of this podcast, but you can easily apply that to politics as well, or personal values, what matters to you. And if you associate that with the brand, it becomes a statement about you. That's the other part where self-identity kicks in, right? I associate myself with brands that say something about me, that express something about me. Either it's positive or negative, but that becomes part of the way we purchase things. But again, even the self-identity or this desire to use a brand as self-identity is because the brand is associated with things that are valuable to you, that are meaningful to you, that are important to you, and that you want to communicate out there. If that makes sense.
When we talk about brand meaning, if we dive a little deeper there, you mentioned five things. And I want to slow down and let the audience hear them again, because I thought it was a big part of the book for me, really isolating. There are different types of things with brand meaning. There's, like you said, cultural,
Mhm,
social,
mhm,
emotional,
mhm,
symbolic, and functional. And they might have to get the book to dive into what each of those means, and that's okay. But I want to acknowledge there's these five ways that we can categorize brand meaning. And I love that you start to call them out. There's a lot of them, and sometimes you focus on just one,
Mhm.
and that there is no one right way. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Of course. So as I said earlier, each brand is comes to life in a specific context, right? And that context help give meaning or attracts a specific consumer segment that projects their own values and add this meaning to a brand. So one thing that drives me nuts in the marketing world is this obsession with one concept, right? Everything is about culture today, or everything is about purpose. And the reason to highlight these different type of meanings that are all valid, that are all potential solutions for a brand when you want to position it, um, showed to me that there are way more options than just following the crowd and obsessing about one of the options, right? One thing I think is I like, for example, because it's so counterintuitive, is the functional meaning. You know, there are brands out there that you love because of the pure functional job they do. And for me, a typical example there is WD-40. It's the lubricant. And it's not something, you know, I want to walk around and hold the can in my hand and say, hey, look, that's me, that's my type, my personality, or that's my crowd. You know, it's like, no, it does a great job and it does it perfectly. That's why I love it. There are other elements where, you know, I want to make a statement, I belong to this group. So I will associate myself with these type of brand that allow me to do that. But that doesn't mean that every single time I position a brand, I want to be a social brand or I want to be a cultural brand or a purely functional brand. No, it doesn't work like that. But this industry has this obsession of, you know, we all want to be purpose driven. Now we all want to be value driven. Now we all want to do ESG claims, you know, and that just drives me nuts to see the simplicity of thinking. So that's one of the reasons I started to break them out and show, you know, I can have a really powerful cultural brand and you can have a very, very powerful functional brand. One doesn't exclude the other, and one is not preferred over the other. It really depends on the brand, the intention behind the brand, the need it fills, and all these kind of things.
It is funny, and so when we talk about authors, right? As personal brands, the we pick a concept like association to focus on to explain it, right?
Mhm.
To be someone associated with that thing. And I'd say the like for Simon Sinek, who was doing, just start with why, and he had that like that golden circle, which was the why and the what and the how at the why in the middle. That image of that golden circle and him giving that on
Mhm.
stage the whiteboard was such a great functional brand association for him,
Mhm.
which was telling other people to, pick one brand meaning in the emotional realm. I was like, but what he was executing was something super functional for him, just like the Duracell battery or the Energizer Bunny. Like there's these like
Yeah.
physical or like manifestations of what it's tied to. But I like that you're like, it's great. We can use them, but as a brand that's developing strategy, like we need to round these things out.
Yes. It's like a toolbox, right? You have a hammer, you have a screwdriver, and you're not just going to use the screwdriver to build a house. You know, you're going to take the tool that works. And so Simon Sinek's framework is brilliant in some very specific cases, but completely pointless in 95% of other cases. And you know, same with cultural branding, same with, you know, some brands have no functional value at all, so don't even bother going there. So yes, and don't get me wrong. So while I diss them a little bit in my book, I'm highly jealous of their success. So if I could have a have the success of Simon Sinek, I'd be ecstatic.
Oh, me too. Me too. I'm like trying to like which shape can I own? Let me pick the triangle, the rectangle, the trapezoid. Let me find something that I can make mine.
That's
Whatever,
true. That's true.
whatever works. You put a lot of work into this. I want to dive into how people can start to develop the strategy for themselves, but I want people to know if they want to get the book, to get a good bearing for this and foundation for this, they should be going to firstthetrousers.com. That's first with the dash in between the words, first dash the dash trousers.com. That'll be linked in the show notes.
Mhm.
And there are links to Amazon. You could also just search for the book on Amazon, type in his name, Ulli Appelbaum, or look up the book, The Science of Brand Associations. It'll be the top one for that topic. So you can find that there. But also, if we want to get started, Uli has put together a assessment that might help you get this moving a little faster. His master scorecard, where you can figure out how strong your brand is. It's free. It's right there on his website homepage. You scroll down to where it says how strong is your brand, and you'll find the link to that there. Uli, did I miss anything on that?
No, that's absolutely correct. And it's a very simple and easy way to really get a quick rough assessment. But I've pressure tested it with maybe like a 10 or 20 marketing directors, and it gives you a base reading that is extremely solid. It can be done better, and over time with AI, we're going to optimize it and stuff like that. And the more data we collect, the better it's going to become. But it's going to give you a very quick assessment of where your strong points are, where your weak points are, what do you need to work on, basically. So yes, no, thanks for mentioning that.
No, I love it. And very founded in science and practicality. And I will say a lot of these things really, like as someone who really came from like the traditional like trained marketing background, I respect a lot of the work that's in here. Just in talking about the strategies to create strong association, some of the things you mentioned, recency,
Mhm.
relevance, repetition, are all things that in marketing science, we often look at these as measures. Are we doing enough in these spaces to do these
Yeah.
things? From stage, I actually, when I'm explaining to people for personal brands, I usually say like there's four things audiences notice to make you more visible. Is it obvious, which is like differentiation?
Mhm.
Is it frequent, which is repetition?
Mhm.
And recency, depending on how you, but I was trying to keep it simple, right? Is it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
obvious? Is it frequent? Is it relevant? And is it familiar? And like the
Mhm.
Nutella, I use the same Nutella example because it's so
Yeah.
familiar to all these people in Europe. So a lot of these core concepts, like we're not inventing these. You're not inventing these. These are practical marketing applications that you could use from a brand development standpoint if you are a marketing manager coming up, or if you're doing this for yourself.
Yes, absolutely. This book is a curation of, the way I look at it is science and best-in-class evidence-based principles. So to your point, I'm not making anything up. I think maybe the only value I really add is to present it in a concise and understandable way, but more importantly, and that's maybe what has been missing until now, to turn that into scorecards, action steps, a simple practical implication for the marketer. Um, the just point you just mentioned it. All these points are familiar in the world of marketing, but are they applied consistently and continuously? No, they are not. You can be relevant. And the only point I would add to your list is, emotional resonance. We know now because of science that if you have an emotional reaction to a stimuli, to something you learn, your memory is going to work harder at storing that information in the brain. So why doesn't every brand interaction have some kind of emotional resonance or trigger some kind of emotional resonance? That can be a funny piece of advertising, that makes you chuckle. That is already an emotional element that strengthened the memory in your brain. We know all this. We just don't apply it systematically because for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, you have a much longer list and they're all
Yes.
valid and they're great in the book. So I really appreciate that. If someone's doing this for themselves, what are some of the things we could start to think about? Like if you're trying to move towards creating strong associations, what are some steps you could start to take?
Well, the first one is really identify what association do I want to create, right? And that you can be start with the look, the way you look. And in my case, for example, one thing that part of me is my German accent. There's no way around it. Another part is maybe the way how I look at things. We try to break them down simply and then make them actionable. So you try to identify what are sort of like the core basic associations that you want to be identified with. The point is obviously you want them to be attractive. Sometimes use the example I can run naked down my street here. Trust me, a lot of people will remember that, but do I add any value? Do I provide anything people are interested in? No. So that's a pointless association. And then once you have defined those, it starts very simply with consistency. It's like, always show up in the way you do. Like you always show up with your cap, with your branded caps. That becomes part of your personality and part of what people associate with you. So consistency, just repetition, as we discussed earlier, repetition leads to familiarity. And over time, we'll be like, oh yeah, Brandon is always doing these great interviews, always wear his caps or has his mic and his headphones. That's part of who he is and part of the content he provides, and he always has great interviews. So repeating that just reinforces the memories I have about you, for example. So those are like simple steps you can really start to do is, clearly define what is it you want to be associated with, and then be consistent and repeat them on YouTube, on your podcast, on your LinkedIn post, everywhere you appear to your audience, you want to be consistent. That's a big thing big brands don't do or marketers don't do is they forget to show their brand assets or their logo or to be consistent in their communication. Biggest mistake ever because it's like compound interest, right? The more you do it, the stronger this memory and association becomes. But obviously, as I said, it needs to be relevant. If you interview, I don't know, people that have no relevant content, I'll be listening to your podcast two times and then I'll be moving on because I'll be like, yeah, okay, it's great, looks great, it's really distinctive, but I'm not really learning anything. There is no value for me. So start with those two things and you'll be ahead of, I would say, 80% of all people out there trying to differentiate themselves and provide valuable content.
Yeah. In reading the book, I was like jotting down a ton of notes that were like, okay, what are my associations? And
Mhm.
I noticed that some of them were things, like some were like what you'd call maybe brand assets, some physical things like the
Yeah,
hat, like the look,
yeah,
even like how if my studio is going to look different than other people's,
yeah.
backgrounds and studios. And that's all associated with the show. And I was like, okay, well, there's the show. The show itself
Mhm.
is a platform is part of my one of my associations,
Yeah,
or me on stage and
yeah,
then for like okay for Brandon as a speaker, I'm starting to write down here what do I have that what are the things I'm going to create that help me with that, and it's like okay, well the book was a huge part of that. Like
yeah,
creating a book that associates me with a topic is a
yeah,
part of that. A speaker reel is a part of that,
yeah.
and how I show up, what I'm wearing on stage is a part of that. So for me, this was really valuable to start to look at what do I have now, and then
Mhm.
what maybe am I missing?
Yeah,
I want to be associated, like, what do I want to be associated with? Certain topics,
yeah,
certain performance things, like
yeah,
speaking, doing good interviews, thought leadership. But
yeah.
like, what am I missing? Is there anything you're doing or you help brands do that say, okay, this is how you figure out what maybe you are not paying attention to?
Well, it's once you take this lens of associations, right, and all the things you described right now, it's a great starting point because it's not rocket science. You can go through them and say, okay, is this association differentiating enough? Does it make you stand out, or do you just feel like one of the other, thousand podcasters? And those are tough questions you need to answer, right? Or you can say, no, my concept is so unique, I really differentiate myself from everyone else out there. The second question is, do I stand out enough? This is like distinctiveness. It's like if you were sitting there in a big bird costume doing your interviews, I'm sure you'd stand out way more than you do right now.
Right.
But right now you stand. So though you can ask, is the association I have created, I want to create, doing what it's supposed to do? One thing that a lot of brands forget is, as I said earlier, this emotional resonance. And there's more and more data that shows the importance. Do I engage my audience emotionally? Do I make them feel good? Do I make them feel they've learned something? And the reality is you have a lot of exposures where you hear something, it's like, yeah, whatever. It doesn't really, it goes in and out again without triggering anything. There wasn't any, you know, compelling story that made me feel something. There wasn't anything that, so you can literally just go through your associations and fine tune them and ask these pressure test questions. And then the next step is really, am I consistent in my associations? Do I appear across touch points when I speak or on YouTube in a way that doesn't have to be 100% the same, but is it congruent? Do people recognize me on stage after having watched my videos? And do they feel it's the same person? Or is he all of a sudden, boring or, telling stupid jokes that have that add no value? You know what I mean? So the second step is really congruence across touch points. Do that, and you'd be, as I said, 90%, 80% above everyone else out there.
As we're wrapping up today, are there any mistakes that we should be avoiding? I know you have a whole section on this, but just some things that come top of mind that you think the audience might find useful.
So one thing that struck me actually when I researched the book is we talk about brand assets, right? And brand assets are important because they are the anchor of all the meaning, of all the associations. Without the arches, the McDonald's meaning are not attributed to the right brand. It's like a fingerprint, in my opinion. And one thing I saw came across a study from a company called Ipsos Global Market Research Company that showed that 85% of all the brand assets that they have tested do not do their job. And what I mean with that is people don't recognize them or people don't assign them to the right brand. Now, they're limited the type of asset they tested, but you see that when you go into the grocery store. For me, I don't know, my wife loves chocolate, so every time I go to the grocery store, I buy chocolate, and I go into this chocolate shelf, and you see all these newer brand, organic brand, and trendier brands. They all look the same. And I don't know why that is. I mean, they all look like a chocolate brand because it's brownish and maybe, white for milk and dark colors and all these kind of things. Maybe some color accent for the fruits that are in there and stuff. But they ultimately all look the same. And I think one of the biggest problem is for companies that develop visual identity to not have the courage to really stand out. So how about you have a green brand of chocolate? That's crazy. That has nothing to do with chocolate. No, but it helps you stand out in a category of brown and darks and these kind of things. So it's almost like the courage to really step out of the category to uh, to differentiate yourself. And the same is true with the content, right? So I worked recently in the cleaning product category. It's a multi-billion dollar category, like a lot of professional marketers. And when you look at all the newer brands, they all have a freaking creation story. That's Joe and Emma that were not satisfied with the other problem. And here it's like Bill and Joanne, but they all tell you the same foundation or creation story. And you're like, okay, how many stories can I absorb before I shut down? It's typically two or three. So tell another story. Have the courage to avoid and stay away from what all competitors are doing and tell a story that no one has heard before. So the courage to step out of the framework of your category or the conventions or the bounds of your category is really, for me, one of the biggest opportunity most companies miss. And it's not taking risk, it's not using Sweeney, or it's not doesn't have to be political or risky or anything like that. But everyone uses browns. How about we use a light color? Everyone speaks about the dramatic story that led to the foundation of the brand. Speak about something completely different, so differentiate you. And the courage to do that is not obvious for a lot of companies out there. So that's for
Yeah.
me one of the big mistake companies do is just be more extreme in what they say, how they come across, how they bring their brands to life. It doesn't mean crazy, it doesn't mean risky, it just means be different.
I think that gives us a lot of room to think about what makes us as a brand uniquely us and
Yes.
actually lean in like because there's so many realms that could be, whether it's performance or personality or
Yeah.
emotion or history. Like look at all of them. Is there
Yeah.
something that makes you uniquely you that you can see and test like and try
Yes.
different things and say what do people resonate with? What's working? What do they think
Yes.
of when they think of me? And I'll
What do
tell you
they
that
remember?
the
Yes.
silly hat that I'm wearing that says brands on it,
Yeah.
I can't not wear it anymore because I've like as I started
Yes.
speaking on stages, I would take the hat off because of the shadow it creates, and people don't recognize me. They're like,
Yeah.
"What? You got to put the hat on." Like
Yeah.
it's like a whole thing. But that's just me. Anyway,
Oh, that's 100% correct. Actually, as I was thinking about it as we were talking, I would think like maybe I should wear a Big Bird costume. It sounds silly, it sounds stupid, but trust me, you'll recognize the Big Bird with a German accent talking about brands. Trust me, that will stand out there.
oh,
I'm
they
not
got
sure.
that. There's a baseball guy here who runs a team called the Savannah Bananas, and he's in a yellow tuxedo, like a silly
Yes,
yellow tuxedo all the time.
absolutely.
Absolutely, everyone knows exactly who that guy is.
That's
Guarantee
exactly
you.
right.
You
Yeah.
don't have to do that, but it worked for him because of what his brand is. But if
Yes.
everyone started wearing silly tuxedos, we'd be like, this is dumb.
then it fails. Yes.
Uli, any last parting advice or words for our audience today?
No, thanks for having me. I think is that one thing I've learned is once you focus on brand association and start to understand them, you understand that marketing is not rocket science. We don't need to, get high in a workshop for 3 days and come up with, fantabulous thoughts and stuff like that. It's about being rigorous, applying some core principle consistently, and all of a sudden you become way more efficient, way more focused in what you do, and you build better brands, in my opinion. So it's simplicity, focus, and knowing what to do. That's really what it is all about, in my opinion.
That's great. So that book is The Science of Brand Associations, Win Minds, Win Markets. Ulli Appelbaum, thank you so much for being here today.
No, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
And thank you guys for listening as always, and we will catch you next time. Brands on Brand.